Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Jamila Woods called HEAVN. But first, let's talk a little bit about Chicago and modern hip-hop. The city in the past has given us Kanye West, Common, and Lupe Fiasco, but if you know anything about the city recently, it tends to be a lot darker. Gang warfare and ever-escalating violence has led to some of the most dark and aggressive hip-hop to emerge from its south side. From the now mostly ignored Chief Keef to the drill scene. This is hard music made by young artists who have seen far too much far too young. And while she's probably more adjacent to it than part of it directly, the rapper Dreezy, whose debut album No Hard Feelings I covered just yesterday, comes with some of the scars of that sound, and she doesn't even live in Chicago anymore. But there's another side to hip-hop in that city, a side that's just as touched by the violence but has rebelled with an unrelenting, socially conscious optimism that seeks to mine some good out of the Windy City, or reclaim the good that's always been there to further enrich the culture. Now, Chance the Rapper is probably the most well-known name out of that collective, but you also got Donnie Trumpet and Saba, maybe even Vic Mensa in a pinch. And then there's Jamila Woods, an artist who straddles the line of hip-hop, R&B, soul, and spoken word poetry, and who has worked with Chance the Rapper and even Macklemore before. And though I wasn't really familiar with any of her solo work or her poetry, I did like her contributions to songs like Sunday Candy, Blessings, and White Privilege too, and with the critical acclaim that her debut album HEAVN has received, I figured it might be worth a look. Was I right? Well, here's the thing. I don't think this album is bad, and I can definitely see it picking up a considerable amount of audience and attention for its grace, its themes, its layered insight, its emotive vulnerability, its focus, and man, I got very little out of it. And that's the frustrating thing. I like and respect a lot of the content and ideas and themes, but the presentation of it all just does nothing for me whatsoever. My issues are more with the music, not with the message. And the exasperating thing is that it's not just the production problems that tend to show up across any artist affiliated with Chance the Rapper. This seems to run a little deeper, and as such is a fair bit harder to articulate on an otherwise pretty decent album that, yes, I am going to recommend. So let's start off with that message and theme, which I'd argue is the real centerpiece of this album and easily has the most meat and power to it, and yet on the surface the presentation might seem a little bit deceptive. A lot of the lyrics and rhyme schemes are set up to resemble meandering nursery rhymes and playground chants, even going so far on Emerald Street for a loose interpolation of the theme from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which can stand in pretty stark contrast to some of the content, which features the systemic oppression that she faces day to day. From deaths at the hands of police as early as Very Black, to the hard-hitting revolution of Black Girl Soldier, driven by a society that wants to fetishize and appropriate black women in their struggles, but ignore the actual people underneath it and their accomplishments. And it's not just her either. The city of Chicago falls into the spotlight on LSD, where she and Chance the Rapper detail the frustration of so many who want to help, gentrify, or exploit the violence in the city without getting to know or care about the city and the people underneath it. And all that draws a very stark parallel to what Kendrick Lamar described in To Pimp a Butterfly, a collapsed sense of self-worth within the black community, which for a shy black girl is already pretty fragile. And when faced with death in the family and lost love, she needs to find a way to rebuild that confidence. And I really do like on Lonely Lonely how she interpolates and reinterprets the chorus line of I Don't Want to Wait by Paula Cole, otherwise known as that Dawson's Creek theme song, to more literal and grounded definition, which really adds so much more weight than that execrable show ever gave it. Much of this record focuses on that arc to relearn to love oneself, and while you could see some of the childish framework as a little bit regressive, to me it rings more of reclaimed innocence. At least that's what I thought before I got to the last three songs on the album, where the imagery takes an abrupt shift skyward, to say the least, towards space and heavens, as she doesn't feel that she really belongs on this earth. It's an isolationist instinct that, yes, it makes sense, and I get the subtext about transcendence through finding self-worth, but it didn't quite sit well with me, just like when Tyler the Creator did it on Cherry Bomb. Removing yourself from the situation doesn't impact a larger change, and when you interpolate John Denver's leaving on a jet plane to do it for Stellar, it's not a good sign when it doesn't carry the same weight as even that song had. Now granted, it does kind of seem to fit for Jamila Woods' delivery, of which I really can't say I like all that much on this album. She's not really an expressive singer here, and while there are subtleties at certain points of her delivery, and the multi-tracking really is masterfully done, especially on songs like Lonely Lonely, I'm not exactly captivated by her delivery, which has an odd ascetic quality to it. It doesn't really help that most of her vocal melodies can feel a little bit flat and inert, not modulating enough and rarely ever building to points of climax to drive the songs forward, instead coasting in a very mellow, self-contained flow that's kind of warm but can feel a little bit tepid to me. And that's not counting the warble and the hooks of songs like Breadcrumbs of the title track that I just did not like at all. It also means that Noname Noname, Saba, and Chance all seem to downplay their deliveries that better fit with the aesthetic, but even with that, I found their level of detail and insight a fair amount more colorful coming from them. From Noname's blunt honesty to Chance the Rapper's detail to Saba's consistent optimism, even despite everything set up against him that goes wrong setting up for this date, that still ends up with him getting friend-zoned. I can appreciate the moment of melancholy, it works here. But if I'm gonna focus on any problems with this album, it comes in the production and instrumentation. And sure, I get that the lyrics and vocal lines are the primary focus of these songs, but it's genuinely startling how little melody there is here. And when it is here, it's nearly always peripheral to the bubbling bass hits and the admittedly textured live drums. It's actually kind of startling how often the instrumental melody seems marginalized to the point where I have to think it's intentional. Like the bubbly fragments on Very Black that barely coalesce, to the guitar muffled so heavily on Lately that when the drums break through with greater texture, the guitar does not. Then you have the strings contorted through compression on Way Up, or the glossy blur of Breadcrumbs that doesn't blend at all well with the drums, and only seems to further marginalize Donnie Trumpet's horn interlude, which actually would otherwise sound pretty good, or how the violin is cut off pretty abruptly after only a few bars on Emerald Street for no adequately explained reason. More evidence of an oddly fragmented approach to many of these songs that never really builds to a significant crescendo or swell. Now that's not saying that songs like LSD or Stellar don't make some of their guitar lines to construct more of an instrumental hook, or how the synth balances a little bit better on the groove on Holy, in the former case the good skittering beat and some good horns, or the buzzing guitar against the sharper drum mix on Black Girl Soldier, which is probably the most hard-hitting song here. But even on songs like Very Black, where it seems like the textured mix will build to more subtle swells, it never really happens. And couple that with wild shifts in fidelity and tone from song to song, I'm left with more instrumental fragments than fully formed songs, albeit pretty well sequenced to flow surprisingly well. And here's the thing, I completely understand that this album is not intended for me and would probably resonate far better with its target audience in both the message and presentation. But strong enough compositions can transcend that. And I'm not convinced that Jamila Woods brought it, especially instrumentally. Like most projects affiliated with Donnie Trumpet and Chance the Rapper in recent years, it feels kind of patchwork. And while I can appreciate the subtler messages here, this feels more tepid than anything else, with strong ideas but a very fragmented execution. For me, it's a strong 6 out of 10, but again, I've always been a little bit cool on this particular production style out of Chicago. If you got more of affinity for this sort of message and delivery, you will like this a hell of a lot more. It's certainly a unique project and one I'm happy that I covered. I just wish I liked it more. But for some, I can definitely see this hitting that transcendent moment. So if you're curious, definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so if you all want to tell me how wrong I am, there's the option. Do you think this probably clicked with you a little bit better? I really wanted this to connect, it just kind of fell a little flat for me, that's all. But anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Just to keep you all knowing, in the know, I'm actually going to Con Bravo this upcoming weekend for the Friday, Saturday, and part of Sunday. So if you guys happen to see me, come over and say hi. Be happy to talk to you. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.